Namaste. Today we have come up with yet another interesting topic called friction. This is Shri from Eduland Foundation. Now let's look at what we are going to see today. Today we are going to see what is friction, what are the causes of friction. We are going to take a look at different types of friction like static friction, sliding friction, fluid friction. Then we are going to dive into factors affecting friction, and we are going to close this class with advantages and disadvantages of friction. So, without wasting any time, let's get started. This is Shri from Eduland Foundation. In our previous class, we have studied that push, pull, stretch, lifting, all these are forces. So, what is friction then? Friction is also a kind of a force. What kind of a force it is? It is a contact force. Friction happens when two objects come in contact with each other, and hence it is called as a contact force. Friction is also an opposing force. So as you can see in this picture, when a person is trying to push the cupboard in one direction, the force of friction will always be acting in the opposite direction, and hence it is difficult to move objects. Friction is a kind of force which is always trying to prevent objects from moving. So now we know what friction is. Friction is a kind of force. What kind of a force is it? It is a contact force which happens when two objects come in contact with each other. Friction is an opposing force. As you can see in this picture, when a person is trying to move the cupboard in one direction, the friction will always be acting in the opposite direction. It is hell bent on stopping the objects to move. Let's move on. What are the causes for friction? Why does friction happen? Why do certain things stop after moving for some time? Now let's look at this example. When you slide the book on the table, the book moves for some time and then stops. Why does this happen? Though the book looks smooth and the table looks smooth, there are certain irregularities on both the surface. They are not completely smooth. There are irregularities like this which help the book and the table to lock with each other. These irregularities are the ones which stop the book from moving. The irregularities on the two surfaces lock into each other. And when we attempt to move this book or any heavy object, the object does not move further. So on a rough surface, there are large number of irregularities. So the friction is greater on the rough surface. So what causes this friction? Let us take a look at it one more time. So as you can see, though the substance or the object looks very smooth, they are not smooth. They have irregularities on this. Both the wood as well as the book has irregularities on this which lock into each other when they move. Rougher the surface, greater is the locking power. Hence, you cannot move objects on a rough surface because they are locked tightly to each other. Only when you apply a force greater in such a way that it breaks the interlocking, then the object moves. So, causes for friction are the interlocking on the two substances. Hope this is clear. So, friction is a force. It is an opposing force. It is a contact force. Why is it caused? It is caused because though the substances appear smooth, they have interlocks or irregularities like this which get attached to each other just like the Velcro. Now, let's move on. So, what is static friction? There are different kinds of friction. Static friction, when the object has not yet moved but ready to move, such a friction is called as a static friction. So what is static friction? When object is not yet moved but it is ready to move or before it starts to move is called as the static friction. As you can see this sofa. The sofa will be moved but at the moment it is not moved. So before it starts moving, this is called as static friction. Clear? All right. Let's move to sliding friction. Sliding friction, as you can see, the person is trying to move the object. Such a friction is called as sliding friction or kinetic friction. When the body starts moving, such a friction is called as kinetic friction or static friction. When the body has not moved but it is ready to move is called as the static friction. But when the body is already started moving, it is called as the sliding friction or kinetic friction. Next, we also have another kind of friction which is called as fluid friction. In air and in water, we do have friction which prevents the object from moving. But the body of a bird and the body of the fish is designed in such a way that it can cut through the friction and move easily. So the friction in water and in air together are called fluid friction. So in order to move through water and air easily, an aeroplane is designed similar to that of a bird so that it can cut across the friction and move easily. Similarly, ship is designed in the shape of a fish to cut across the liquid and move easily. So the friction exerted in air or in water is called as fluid friction. So we have understood the three kinds of friction: static, sliding or kinetic, and we have understood what is fluid friction. Here, I hope it is crystal clear so far. Let's move into the factors affecting friction. Now, if you roll a cell on a smooth surface, you would see that the cell rolls further and then stops. If you roll the same cell on a rough surface, the cell would not move far away. It would stop very close. Why is this happening? This is because of the interlocking what we studied in the previous slide. So both the cell as well as the cloth has these interlockings called as irregularities, and they both get attached to each other and thus the object stops. So what are the factors affecting friction? One is the surface. Smoother the surface, lesser is the friction and the cell will be able to roll further. Rougher the surface, the cell will get locked very soon to the surface and it would not move further. Smoother the surface, lesser is the friction, greater the surface, or rougher the surface, greater is the friction. So friction also depends on normal reaction. What do you mean by normal reaction? Let me explain. When an object is very heavy, to move a heavy object, it requires a lot of force when compared to the lighter object. This is called as normal reaction. So what are the factors affecting friction? One, the smoothness and the roughness. The second one is the normal reaction. Heavier the object, greater is the friction to move it. Lighter the object, it will be easier for us to move the objects. Now let's look at advantages and disadvantages of friction. So what are the advantages? If there was no friction, it would have been very difficult for us to write on a piece of paper. Look at the piece of paper, look at or observe your paper and your pen. Because the paper is smooth, the pen or the pencil is easily able to slide on the paper. That's why it is very difficult for us to write on a sandpaper. Similarly, the advantages of friction are lighting a matchstick. You can see the rough surface on the matchbox and the smooth surface of the matchstick. Smooth surface of the matchstick is rubbed on the rough surface to help us to light the matchstick. So applying brakes are also because of the friction, because you apply brakes on the road and the object stops. That is because of the advantage of friction. Walking on the road is because of friction. You walk on the road because there is friction. You would have walked on the same road comfortably, but when it rains, you might have noticed that you would slip on the same road, or the road appears to be quite slippery. Why is this so? It is because when there was no rain, there was lot of friction between your slippers and the road, or between your feet and the road. Remember, we spoke about the interlocking, where the two objects lock against each other. So your feet and the road had locked well, and there was good friction, and hence you were walking on the road comfortably. When it rained, the interlocking between the road and your slippers became less. That's the reason you felt that the road was slippery, or sometimes if we walked fast or ran on a watery road, we would have slipped. Let's look at the disadvantages of friction. You might have all experienced that the sole of our shoes weathers over a period of time. Why does it happen? It's because of friction. We are continuously walking on the road, climbing steps, playing, and you can see by the end of the year or 6 months, depending on how much you're using your shoes, the soles of the shoes would have weathered. This is because of the friction. This is another disadvantage. You would have also seen the steps on an overhead bridge or a foot over bridge in a railway station would have worn out, because many people are walking on the steps over and over and over again. Because of friction, heat is released. Whenever you're trying to prepare juice or chutney in the kitchen, you would have noticed that after some time, your mixie becomes very hot. Why is this? This is because of the friction. This is another disadvantage. Because it gets heated, sometimes most of the parts inside a mixer or grinder gets melted, and we would have to get our mixie or grinder repaired. And because of the heat, excess of heat, lot of energy is also lost. This is another disadvantage of friction. Clear? So we have understood what are the advantages and disadvantage. Because there is friction, you are able to write on the paper. Because there is friction, you are able to light a matchstick. Because of friction, you are also able to hit the head of the nail and put it into the wall. Because of friction, you are able to walk comfortably on the road. You might have also noticed that on walking on a road, it's much easier than walking on a marble, which has a little water on it. When there is water on a marble floor, there are high chances of slipping on the floor. That's because the friction is reduced. We have seen the advantages and the disadvantages of friction. Let's take a look. How could we increase or decrease the friction? So in olden days, we never had soles which had these kind of threads, due to which many of the people, especially the elderly, would slip in the bathroom or would slip on the tile and get hurt. So now we have soles of the shoes which have great threading, which gives us good grip. So we also have anti-skid and anti-slip slippers coming now. Why is it so? Because they have increased the friction in the sole of the slippers. Similarly, even the wheels are threaded so that it gets a good grip. If these threads are worn out or it becomes bald, it is time to replace your tires. Otherwise, when you apply brakes, if you're traveling with a very high speed and you apply brakes, your vehicle would skid and it may lead to accidents. So to increase the friction, they increase the threads on the soles of your shoes or slippers, as well as on the tires. Most of the shoes also have spikes. People who run, the athletes or people who play cricket, tennis, they all have shoes which have spikes, which give them good grip, so that when they are running, they do not skid and fall down. Sometimes we not only have to increase the friction, there is a need to decrease the friction also. Let us see where all we need to decrease the friction. For example, if you consider carom board, the carom board is quite rough. When it is rough, when you strike the pawns won't move according to your wish. But when you apply powder on the carom board, you decrease the friction on the board. so that when you strike, the pawns move easily and hit the goal or hit the pocket, and the chances of you winning is more. That's why when we play carom board, we usually apply powder on it. Similarly, people who do weightlifting, you might have seen before they lift the weight, they rub their hands with powder so that to decrease the friction, so that it also, or sometimes they also do that to increase the friction so that they get good grip of the weights and they could lift it comfortably. Otherwise, it would slip and fall down. So sometimes we also bring down the friction in the machines by applying oil. So when you apply oil, you bring the friction down in the machines. A good example would be between the door and the hinges. Sometimes you would have noticed a cracking sound in the door because the friction between the door and the hinges have increased. The minute you apply oil on the hinges, the friction reduces and the door starts closing and opening smoothly without the noise. In this chapter, in this section, we have studied the increase and decrease of friction. You might also think about many other methods where we would have increased or decreased the friction, and write it in the comment box. I hope you liked this lesson and enjoyed listening to this lesson as much as I enjoyed presenting it to you.